What happens? What's the next point of reaction that makes you enter into her world and allows you to see this conflict through her own eyes? What's going to happen next?
It kind of sounds like from the beginning and what it leads into with the second interaction that she seems younger since she's living with her mother and she's sneaking out to smoke cigarettes. Kind of seems like something more of an older teen or maybe a younger woman like you're talking about. And the next thing kind of complicates things from her narrative in that she's talking to her neighbors and she's smoking and then the neighbors come home and they seem carefree, they've got wine, they've got all this stuff. And she's like, isn't this crazy? Wow. As though she's totally oblivious to how it actually affects the individual that she's actually talking to, which kind of shows potentially the divide that's being felt, even though they're neighbors. And this should be affecting, or could be affecting both of them in a similar sense, but it doesn't seem to.
Great. So through her point of view, you're getting an action that is in a way symbolic of a larger action. It may not be totally clear that the women who bring their children are Israelis. And she is, in this event, a lone Palestinian. And what is the statement that really sends her off? The speaker is really bothered by something that one of the women says. Do you recall what that is? It's a comment, isn't our country crazy to be doing all of this fighting, which is inferring. But that's a loaded word, our country, because both sides claim. And this is the source of this war. And here we have a very personal experience that conveys, for this particular person, this Palestinian woman, the source of anger, the source of her desire, sometimes to see rockets come into Tel Aviv, to create destruction. The other thing I was thinking is, how are we doing on time so that we...
20 minutes?
Oh, good. Okay. We've got time. This is an essay that moves through different personal experiences. And after the description, we enter the speaker's mind. She tells us with detail and with repetition of those details how she's being affected, what she's taking into her own mind, her emotions, from not just the experience of that bomb shelter, but the overall experience of being in a war zone and being in a situation that, for her and for both sides actually, seems so unjust. There's no justice in what's going on in that place. And how, this is the point about good literature and what it can do for us as readers, as opposed to reading an article in a newspaper. What happens now? She begins to think about this in terms of hearing writing on a typewriter. And actually, it's not a typewriter, it's a computer because there's a cursor on the screen. And she begins to relate to her environment in a different way. She sees this cursor and sees it pulsating. And the pulsating is both the heart and the forcing of blood through the system, and then she starts to think about it. She becomes extremely angry. And then she goes from thinking about this life to thinking about death, seeing the situation in Israel and Palestine as life and death in sometimes a meaningless way. So she is a person who is first of all, wounded. She's wounded by this experience and forced to see her world in ways that most of us here would never really think about our lives. So what this, as a piece of literature, as a piece of creative writing is doing, is it's allowing each one of us to enter into her experience as a witness, as a victim, and her particular kind of experience that affects her deeply. And I want to emphasize that because everything that we see for the most part doesn't allow you to get there. So it's important to see the value of writing of all kinds of genres. Poetry can do it, fiction, short stories, and here a creative kind of an essay. Brings us into both a situation and a life in a way that really nothing else can. And what happens next? Do you see the progress from her being damaged psychologically and emotionally, her perceiving things in her world like this pulsating cursor, the way she almost irrationally relates to it? Does anyone notice where that next step brings you? Where she goes from there? Where does her anger, her distress lead her? Yeah.
She looks like she kind of starts thinking about how she spoke and her way of thinking before the war and now, like, current state.
How it's affecting her language. Right. What is more personal to us than language? It is something that we don't even think about normally, but language often defines who you are. If you speak another language, maybe it's your native tongue, very much that affects your understanding of who you are in relationship to the world. And this is an important aspect of what she's trying to tell us. She is so distressed that language is being assaulted, and her language is distressful, even to her. The next step, after this extremely personal experience, does anyone want to take a shot at where it goes next in this sort of road that she's traveling inside herself, deeper and deeper? It's difficult to figure out, actually. And that's why I think she puts a lot of that next section in italics. It's sort of a, pay attention to this, because it's not really obvious. She begins to talk about the you and her anger toward this you starts to grow. And you want to take a guess at who you is here?
She's talking about God.
Absolutely, yes. Now, that's something that's not easy to either read. It could be an offensive kind of part of the narrative. And yet, how true it is when you are in such a traumatic environment to lose faith first in your fellow man, and then trying to make sense of the obscenity of this war, of this conflict, of the deaths daily. Trying to make sense of it, you might turn to that higher power that you believe in and get some satisfaction, some comfort, some point of perspective, and yet life in a war zone and life that is marked by a history of oppression might, as it does here, push you beyond belief, push you to a point where not only do you not believe, but you become infuriated, you're angry at God. You won't find that in a newspaper, I don't think. So there's obscenity against what is perceived as the obscene. It's a pretty powerful step. So maybe that's enough to, parse out what's happening in this particular essay story. We might talk about what you're doing and whether you see opportunities for creating a new narrative using the imagination, using words in ways that normally you don't do as students. You're not writing academic essays, but you might use language to create a narrative that maybe exposes the culture of war in a different way, that exposes violence for what it is from points of view that haven't been considered. So, yes, would you, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were going to raise your hand. What kinds of things are you doing now that might have a connection to the kind of writing you find in a literary journal? Or if not, why not? Why do you think what you're reading or writing now is different? Yeah.
There's there's clearly a personal aspect here, and I feel like, especially in media, we kind of get like this overview of it, and we don't get any personal narratives at all, so there's no, I think the personal connection aspect is really powerful in any story, in any situation. I think like a personal narrative is really powerful in any situation.
Yes.
And I think that really comes through this piece.
Yeah. So the kind of work, are you reading, I imagine there's a textbook that you read from?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, I'm trying to get a sense as to the dimension that text gives you about violence and war and how to understand the narrative, as opposed to what writing, this kind of writing allows you to do. Is that you want to compare them in any way? Or, yeah.
I think one reason why potentially that a lot of these types of texts aren't used necessarily like in conjunction with textbooks and things like that is the creative element to them. Like while it lends itself entirely to being able to kind of further that emotionality or that understanding of what it is that's going on that is so crucial and so important within these texts. A lot of times, especially in like classroom settings, there's a really big thing as far as being unbiased or trying to present a balanced view. But when you're reading textbooks, or as we've done a lot of these critical analyses with textbooks, we find that that might not even necessarily be true within these texts. And so how are those boundaries currently drawn, and how can those boundaries change in the future?
Great. Yeah. That idea of boundaries is a very valuable one to keep in mind, because every individual and society creates their own boundaries. And to understand, to get inside of another person's boundary, to get inside of the way another society thinks, it's very difficult to do sometimes, often. So the point I would continue to bring back into the conversation is, this is all about boundaries, this kind of writing. There's even every issue we do visual art, so you'll find some paintings by a Palestinian painter, which is another way for us to approach the culture of war and to see in a different way than even writing provides. I think you know the kind of images you see every day about war, about the consequences of war. Here are images that you won't see in popular media, but they are leading you into this subject in a different way. And I just wanted, maybe we should end. I don't know how much time we have left, but
8 minutes.
okay, yeah. So, rather than going to that, how about if we have some questions? You might have some questions to ask.
If you started out as a very small publication here, just kind of 8 years ago or so, 8 or 9 years, how is it that you've been able to grow and be able to retain these kinds of international I guess, pieces within this